Thank you, everybody. And for those of you who have only just joined us, thank you for being here. It's fantastic to see you and everybody else as well. For those of you who have just joined us, my name is Sebastian Sequoia Grayson. I'm a senior lecturer in epistemics here at the School of Computer Science and Engineering, and it is my pleasure to be your MC for today. This afternoon, we're going to change the pace a little, and in a moment, we're going to begin with a panel discussion. Before then, however, I apologize, I lost my spot. Now, I'd like to begin the session formally by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the university is built and on which we meet today, the land of the Bedegal peoples. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Our research is known for its breadth and its depth, and today we're joined by exceptional leaders in industry and academia, all of whom work tirelessly to make sustainable and real impact. CSE, being one of the largest schools of its kind, is fortunate to have created a strong network of alumni, industry, government, and inter-university partnerships. We're lucky to be joined today by Pia Seeto, Head of Service Governance at TPG, David Snowdon, Director of Engineering at Arista Networks, and Gernot Heiser, Scientia Professor and John Lyons Chair of Operating Systems here at CSE. The panel will be facilitated by Flora Salim, Professor and CISCO Chair of Digital Transport here at CSE. The theme of the panel will explore the importance of research collaborations and what we need to do to further nurture ongoing conversations. Please welcome Pia, David, Gernot, and the Chair of the Forum, Flora.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your introduction, Seb. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists here. So, first of all, Pia. Pia is an IT and telecommunication professional who loves enabling impact through technology, and she's a strong advocate of diversity and inclusion. She's a strategic leader who enjoys orchestrating decisions at scale with experience across telco, finance, startups, travel, IoT, public safety, and the energy sector. Pia is also supporting the school as the chair of Industry Advisory Board, and she continues the legacy as being the forefront of the CSE nationally and internationally. Thank you, Pia. David. So David's actually an alumni, one of our alumni. So he studied as computer engineering at UNSW, subsequently earning a PhD, supervised by another fellow panelist, Gernot Heiser, determining how to model, predict, and leverage the way in which different types of software behave with respect to their energy usage. Energy efficiency has been a very keen interest for David since building solar power cars with the UNSW SunSwift team, competing in the World Solar Challenge and obtaining a Guinness record for the fastest solar-powered car. After completing his degrees, David applied the efficiency mindset to low-latency financial trading, first working directly in trading firms and later founding MetaMaker. As CTO, he set strategy and led the engineering team, transforming the network since connecting the trading ecosystem, including the ASX and Eurex. Since Arista Networks' acquisition of MetaMaker, he has acted as the Director of Engineering in Sydney. David is also a member of the school's Industry Advisory Board. And the last but not least, Gernot is very known to us as the founder and leader of the Trustworthy System Research Group. He's a world leader in applying formal methods, which is mathematical proof techniques, to ensure the security and safety of real-world computing systems. Gernot has a strong track record of industry collaborations, consulting, and startups. So I'd like to encourage everyone to think about questions you'd like to ask. There'll be Q&A at the end, but Please think about your question from now if you have any about industry, research collaboration. But let's start with the first question that we have prepared for them. Okay, so maybe I'll start off with the first question to Gernot. You had so many different industry academia projects. You've already showed it in your lightning talks before, tons of them. But if you can pick one, Gernot, tell us, one industry academic collaborative project you found to be most rewarding and enjoyable. And if you can tell us why and maybe some of the characteristics that make them rewarding.
Okay, thanks, Flora. So to me, there's two real benefits from industry collaborations. The one is getting your technology, the one we developed, out into the real world. And if this is not something that motivates you, then you shouldn't be an academic in engineering, because in the end, engineering is there to affect people's lives. But the other aspect is that it's an opportunity to learn. And I learned so much from industry engagements about what are the real problems, what are the ones that are actually worthwhile solving. And as an academic, you do live in a bit of a bubble, you do see what's going on in the world, you read the literature, etc. But there's a lot of sort of various inside-focused research, and getting engagement with people at the coalface who do apply the technology helps you understand what are the problems that actually are really worth solving, and and then you can go back and analyze them, find out, so what's the underlying issue, how can we solve that, and that can be a huge boost to research. And that, to me, these are the two things that make up a good industry engagement. Is on the one side, it gives you the real-world deployment. On the other side, it gives you the drive of ongoing research.
That's great. So you've told us about the characteristics, but can you give us an example? Can you name a project?
Oh, yeah. So one of my early industry engagements was with Qualcomm. This is when we were at the early phases of the journey of building really reliable microkernels. And literally one day I was sitting in my office and the phone rings, and some guy answers at the other end, identifies himself as an IP lawyer for Qualcomm, which of course first sends shivers down your spine, because Qualcomm is known to be lawyers' friends. But they didn't want to sue us. They wanted to understand exactly the conditions of the licensing for our kernel, which we open sourced. And this would not have happened had we not open sourced the kernel. So this is a sort of a side remark. Open sourcing is a really powerful way of getting tractions and getting the technology out and getting people interested, but also it really helps to shut out the competition, because when you open source something that's really good, why would anyone else try to do a competing project? So in this particular case, Qualcomm had a real problem, and it's happened to be something I predicted for years and was really surprised when it happened. This was in around 2004, where phones becoming really powerful. Qualcomm was leading chipset makers for mobile phones, and they were all built sort of on a flat address-based model where everything can access everything, and it's obvious that this doesn't scale. Eventually it collapses under its own complexity, and there was a clear reason to adopt more modern operating system technology. And being Qualcomm, they tried it internally, and some smart people saw it as a train wreck and had a plan B in place, and we were actually plan B2. And so they contacted us, and it moved at lightning speed. Like 6 weeks later, we were teaching a course for their engineers, and as we didn't know until later, within a half year, they had decided to adopt that technology. And it really gave us a huge boost in the sense that, okay, there was real money coming to us, but it also really helped us to drive the research into the direction that was most promising. And within 2 years after that, we were shipping on 250 million Qualcomm modem chips a year. So.
Very good. So thank you for that. So I think what Gernot actually highlights also that in industry and academia, they actually kind of work on a very different time scale. So I'm just wondering, David, so you've experienced both sides. So you were a PhD student here, and now you've run a company. What are some of the drivers in industry in terms of innovation? And can you also talk more about the sort of like time scale that we are discussing?
Yeah, sure. One of the first things that someone taught me about business was that the first rule of business is staying in business. So you do whatever you need to do in order to continue the business onward, and usually that means that most activities that you undertake in a business are commercially focused, that you can't take deep dives into interesting ideas on a whim because it just doesn't have that commercial imperative. The time frames are not sufficiently short to be able to have the payoff within the period that you need them to pay off in order to make it worthwhile investing your opportunity cost. And it's not just the dollars that you're spending on the particular engineers, like in the case of an engineering project, it's the opportunity cost that those very talented, hard to find engineers are very, very valuable to you, far more valuable than their salaries. So you're expecting many multiples payoff on the investment you're making in people. So you need projects to have a short time scale, but equally you would like to have this kind of deep academic approach to problem solving, and that's where industry engagements like the one between Qualcomm and UNSW really work, where you have an existing body of research which has already been going, I think at that point, for about 10 years or something like this, and it intersects with an industry problem, or it can be adapted to an industry problem, and therefore the time frame for the deployment of that research and those deep academic ideas is very significantly shortened. So in industry, I'd say like a 3-year time scale is, well, in our industry anyway, a 3-year time scale is a long time frame. We think like if I'm thinking 3 years ahead, that's strategic thought. That's not tactical. That's strategic. Tactical is more along the 6 months to a year time frame. So we're thinking in those sorts of time frames, whereas for deep research projects, you're really looking at the 10-year sort of time frame, I should think.
Wow. So this actually reminds me of thoughts like, academics like to go to industry partners and say, hey, let's do an ARC linkage project, and that actually means not just even 3 years, but actually beyond, because waiting for the research to be written, to be funded. So yeah, I agree where the tension is. Pia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Dave is saying, and I think that's why we come to these events, and people within industry come to these events, because we know that it does take time to do the right level of research, and we come to hear the ideas that you guys are thinking through and working through. And to your point, to try and address the timescale issue in business, you sort of need to have that in your back pocket so that you can have that random call to Gernot and say, hey, in industry, I've got this particular problem and maybe you can help me resolve it. And it's about keeping those lines of communication open for a very long period of time, I would say, so that we can then short-circuit the commercialisation aspects to take it to market. But we don't usually collaborate as in industry very well, I would say.
It's definitely difficult to make it happen. But it depends if there is a good intersection of existing research with problems. And this requires great forethought and effectively product management on the academic side, which is what Gernot was talking about, going out and talking to industry leaders and having those industry collaborations already. The seed of an industry collaboration is another industry collaboration, I would think. So those conversations actually happen. I think having those ongoing conversations, meaning that the research is positioned in the right place so that you can intersect with real industry problems at the time. And that, again, goes back to Gernot's point about if you're not seeing your research being deployed, it's probably not going to get deployed. If you can't imagine any way that it could have an effect long-term, then it probably won't.
And I guess just to add to that, it just takes so many different conversations and so many random conversations. I was actually talking to Lawrence and some of the IAB members this morning, just trying to work through this particular dilemma, like how do we in industry tap in? But it might just be coffee this morning, and it might just be a couple of connections that then you go, okay, well that sounds very similar to that person, and then maybe have a deeper dive. But you just never know when those moments are going to happen. So I don't know whether we've really cracked it at scale, because how do we get to those moments?
So how do we get that conversation going? How do we get more that story, nice story that Gernot say, Qualcomm, call him, but he's already pretty well known at this stage. How do we get our early career researchers here to be able to, to get industry interested in their research? Do you have any ideas?
It's difficult, and it's not by accident that people who have had industry engagements find it easier to get new ones, because that's not only a confidence building thing, it's also a networking thing. And it's particular in Australia. Australia doesn't have the culture of that they have in Europe, like in Germany, France, Switzerland. The attitude in industry is, if you have a problem, you take a pot of money to the next technical university and get them to solve it. Australia doesn't have that, and it's a both-sided thing, right? A lot of academics do not really know how to talk to industry and to be flexible enough to adapt what they're doing to solving a real problem and even identifying the opportunities in one of these problems. So that's a learning effort, and there's no easy recipe to start this off other than really trying to build these centers as we're doing them here that engage industry, right? Get industry on campus, get academics out to talk to the companies and explore their problems. It's normally something that takes a lot of time. With Qualcomm, we were lucky, right? This took a few weeks. That's definitely not normal. My experience with other projects, it takes years. And typically, if you can identify a small starting project, don't look for the money, look for the opportunity. That's a good way to get started. But it also requires that the industry gets insight on what we're actually doing. So this is why events like this are definitely important.
So I think we learn from a positive example, but I think we can also learn from a negative example. So I wonder if David or Pia want to share any example, anecdotal story where you think, what are the things that we should not do in trying to pursue industry, academia collaboration?
I wouldn't say that, I think we're fraught with a whole heap of barriers which make it difficult to do. But I wouldn't say that you shouldn't do it, if that makes sense. I think it is difficult for a reason. It is difficult and challenging because we've got to actually, confront and have the debate so that we can then on-sell the concept onto our businesses and whatnot. And we in industry tend to do that a lot. So we get very tough and skin around some things. But you put yourself out there to challenge. And it's worth the challenge, because when you go through that sort of gauntlet, usually your idea gets better. And I think you have to be somewhat brave to keep picking yourself back up there and asking again or trying, or seeing the hundreds of no's that come through and saying, try again, do that again. Now, I don't know whether academics, you would naturally put yourself in that situation, but I strongly encourage you to do that. And I think for industry, it's about being open and listening and encouraging to those points to, try and keep the conversation, as I said, going.
It's like riding a bicycle. You might fall down a couple of times, learning how to ride it, but then once you know how to do it, you become better. And
I think to your point, Gernot, there's no recipe. I would say some strategies that have worked for me in one situation won't work in the next. So it's about sort of knowing, okay, well, I'll try something else now and being okay to try it.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is making sure that the projects that universities are working on, or these industry, are the right sort of projects. My negative example is around one particular project, but I think it's about choosing the right projects that really suit a university or the university mindset and the academic mindset, and making sure that the projects that are conducted in industry collaborations are better done in a university rather than within a company. There is an enormous amount that we can just get an engineer to do. And it's much more efficient for us to get an employee who is already up and running with all of our processes. We own all of the IP. It's just infinitely simpler if we need to implement something. If we just need to implement something where the idea is clearly implementable and we can kind of infer that this will just work, we can just do that. And it's much more efficient for us to just do it internally. where the industry engagement really comes in is where you have a problem which may not work, we don't know how to solve, where we can't just infer the solution, and it's not like one of our engineers like to say everything is just typing. Like, everything is just typing if you know what to type, and often you have to type a whole lot of wrong things if you're doing research in order to find the right thing, and to have that idea that maybe you won't find the right thing, maybe this isn't possible, maybe you're able to prove that it isn't possible, and that's good research. But in the case of industry, if we're able to prove that it doesn't work, that's a whole ton of wasted opportunity and opportunity cost. So I think those things all tie into my negative example, which is where we had engaged with a PhD student, which is, and it's not a negative example, it worked out the way it was supposed to work out, but we engaged with the student and they implemented something for us and it worked. It was a blob of stuff that we needed implementing, and it was kind of off to the side because it couldn't be part of our core product because we couldn't rely on the university to definitely deliver it, and they were treating it as a research project. We didn't have a good idea. We hire PhD students all the time. We didn't know how good this particular one was. So this is just an example of, we got someone to implement something, but it's really the job. It was an engineering job, not a research job. And it really makes sense to target those industry engagements at something that the university can be really good at.
Yeah, just picking up on that point. There's an opportunity cost of these projects, not only on the industry side, but also on the university side. And one of my failed industry engagements, where Dave was actually involved with as a student, and it was not his fault that it was a failure, was that there was not enough benefit for either side for doing this. It was a straight engineering job. The engagement from the company wasn't that great. Our interest in it wasn't great because we didn't really get much out of it. We basically did it to make management happy, and in the end, everyone wasted their time.
I don't know, I got something out of it. I had to implement a circuit board, and it was, at the time, it was the most complicated circuit board that I'd ever built, and this was a great distraction from my PhD, and set it all back by 6 months. I had a wonderful time. So I got something out of it, but I think everybody around me, it's probably not the greatest example of an industry engagement.
That's great. So I think you talk about different drivers. Is there any example you think Australia can learn from the global context in terms of industry, research, academic collaboration, and how do we actually make, I just read, a news article yesterday about the Tech Central, that actually New South Wales government trying to make Sydney as the next Silicon Valley. But it's not just about a place, it's about a culture. What's missing? What do we need to do to get there? And how do we get UNSW, CSE as part of it?
Silicon Valley is an awesome example of industry collaboration with academia, right? All of my bosses, one of the founders of Arista Networks is David Churton, who was one of the first two, and the other co-founder was Andy Bechtolsheim, both of whom were the initial two founders of Google, investors in Google, I should say. So these are academics, or certainly David Churton is an academic in the systems group over there who has had a whole ton of different spin-outs. So there's really great models for industry collaboration. One of them is spinning out companies from a university. You've got a blob of work that can be turned into, that has been worked on for a long period of time. You take lots of risks in order to get there, and then you spin it out as a startup, and that's a fantastic model. I think one of the things we're talking about here is where you have larger companies who need a problem solved and need a blob of work. That's a harder problem to solve because it's a little bit more difficult to see how you stop doing what you're doing, adapt what you're doing to what a university is good at, and continue on. And I think Gernot probably has more experience with that than any of us.
I would say, to add to that, you sort of need all of the threads working together, because there's no one strategy. You need the moments where you fail a few times and have chosen the wrong intersection to go, okay, that's. And I think it's important to the ecosystem that we have all of those moments, as well as the intersection, as well as, because you can't sort of grow bigger without those failure moments.
And that long-term product management we call it product management in the industry would be, and my time frame for product management is, I'm asking my customers about, what products do they need in 2 years, 3 years, and it may not be, what are the problems that they're facing? It's exactly the same conversation that you have between industry and the universities about what problems you're facing, how are you thinking about solving them? And then my conversation with my customers is, well, you know, that mousetrap you want, how about we build it completely differently? And how about we think about your problem completely differently? And it's those paradigm shifts that probably happen best at a university that really change the industry and provide those real leaps in the standards of the products. And I imagine the same is true of the industry collaborations. It's just different timescales. We're talking about 2-3 years as a long time frame for our company, and you're talking about 10 years as a long time frame for the university projects.
Thank you for that. I'm just wondering if there's any question from the floor you'd like to ask the panel. And if you can kindly introduce yourself as well. Oh, Aaron first. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Over there? Yeah. No, it's okay. I defer to our industry visitors.
Hi, yes, my name is Adrian De Chico from a startup called Aromatic here in Sydney, New South Wales. Yeah, my question is, I guess, two typical timeframes for these industry-university collaborations and typical output also from your experience. So timeframes, typical timeframes, and typical outputs. Thank you.
Timeframes and legal costs?
And
Output.
Typical
Outcomes.
output.
Yeah. So for an industry engagement, the output, the primary output is never going to be papers if it's a successful project. This is something that will then follow on because you understand the problem better and then you drive the research. The time frame can be, I've had different time frames over the years. Can be a 1-year project, can be a 3-year project. It hardly ever goes any longer because industry needs a bit more certainty to allow for a longer-term research project. But there's a lot of flexibility, and actually in engagement models, there's a wide variety of engagement models. UNSW has really picked up a lot of flexibility and also speed over the last few years. I spent some time in Cairo, which was a bit of a nightmare, and coming back to uni and see that, oh, you can actually do things quickly. Wow, that's impressive. I had contracts getting through within literally weeks if there was enough pressure for it. So, and as IP models, etc., there's also a lot of flexibility. The old mindset was always that we want to keep the IP. UNSW is sort of, and other universities have woken up to the fact that this is not necessarily the right approach. Dave mentioned Silicon Valley, right? Berkeley, definitely one of the most successful universities. They very early sort of got into this model of just giving the IP away to their students and let them run with it. That's the way you make impact. And certainly UNSW, to a degree, understands that. I'm not sure whether I answered your question, but...
And I think the money ends up coming back to the university in the long run with endowments and so forth. It's certainly in Silicon Valley with Stanford would
That's
be
part of the model, yes.
So I think I remember that another article is going to be celebrated in another event later today. That actually UNSW startups that come out of UNSW is actually always continuously on the top 100 in the country. But that's actually a very good example of output. But another one is potentially also insights coming from the research that can be used for consulting and all kind. I see another hand here.
Thank you. Lawrence Crumpton, I'm with Microsoft. It's really a question for all of you, but I would like Gernot to give his opinion first. I love the work you've done with Secure Kernel, and I've heard the story a number of times, but I'm curious how much research time had gone into the Secure Kernel before Qualcomm called you, before they knew about it? And then the second part to that question is, how do you make that portfolio of innovation that sits at the university available in a way that a company like Qualcomm can know that there is an answer here or a potential, a B2 here, so that they do call you?
Yep. Good question. So it's the acoustics are a bit bad up here, so I think you asked about the time frame till it got there. And what was the second one?
The second question is, how do you make the innovation portfolio that resides at a university, that knowledge that you have here, available so that industry knows there is potentially an answer here?
Yep, okay. So in terms of time frame, at the time Qualcomm started talking to us, we were doing this for 10 years. So there was a long pipeline of research. And again, this was sort of driven by some expectations of fundamental problems that are really going to make a difference in the long term and really being dedicated to them. And it sort of happened really at the right time when we were really ready to take it out. In terms of how to make it available, like my recipe, I said it before, we open source what we do. And that's actually not a detractor from being able to engage, because you could think, well, if you make it open source, it's all free, they just take it and run away with it. Some of that happens, but the particular larger companies who, like David said, understand the value of an engineer and their engineering time, they quickly realize that it's much more efficient to them to pay us to use our really highly skilled people to take the technology to the next step and apply to what their problem is. That doesn't mean it's all just applied engineering, right? I stay away from these kind of projects because that's the opportunity cost. I don't really get anything out of it. My problem is not to keep my student and staff busy. My problem is getting enough of them. So if I put them on a pure engineering project, then that's a net loss for me. But certainly open sourcing is a really powerful thing. There's other models, but I'm totally committed to the open source model.
Yeah, I think that goes to it's much more efficient for us to do implementation in-house because we can really integrate that with a whole bunch of closed source systems that we may have, or any secret source that we may have in-house, any of those sorts of things. But bringing the right kind of open source licensed software in-house and works very, very well. I mean, I remember in the case of the L4 stuff, like we hadn't been working on the security side of things for quite a long time. That was quite a nascent project when Qualcomm came along. I mean, they weren't really going after security as they were sort of more reliability, I think, at the time, trying to run Linux virtualized and make sure that you didn't get into the baseband processor. So there was some security, but it wasn't to the degree that it has now become. And so that presumably is the direction that your group has taken over the last little while is presumably largely a result of many conversations with all of these industry partners that you've been working. So it's guided the research, and I think that's a very powerful thing because it means you end up where the industry is going to be in 5 years' time, in 7 years' time, in 8 years' time, which means you have a deliverable, whether it be open source or not. You have that expertise at the time that the industry needs it. And for you guys, I think it's, and the academics, it's that forward-looking ability to take risks on things like verifying a kernel at the time seemed like a completely impossible task. I thought, I was just a bystander in the group at the time, but we were looking at it going, we might be able to do this, like it might happen, and Gernot was very confident and so forth. We were like, oh man, really? Like this is a pretty big goal, and done it, and then gone, way further than I don't know, it seemed it would go at the time. But it was just great to be able to watch from the side.
Great. I see two hands. The one at the back first. If you could introduce yourself.
Hello. Okay. So there is a lot of gap between.
Sorry. Wait. Who are you and where are you from?
I'm Arindam. I work in Data 61 in CSE.
Yep.
So there is a lot of gap between the universities and the industries. So, and also I have a lot of practical experience in that. So the professors typically, they are very theoretical. They want to work on more mathematical or foundational aspects of the thing, whereas the industry, much more practical. They are working on short-term projects, right? Whereas professors have long-term goals. And also, I'll be very blunt to say that professors typically think that the industry people are not that smart enough. They don't want to engage on theoretical stuff. whereas maybe from the industry side, they think that these professors are very theoretical. They are not conscious about the industry's goal, right? Now, so in many countries, this gap is not easy to think. For example, in the United States, for example, if you see the research lab, the good research lab like the IBM research or the Microsoft research, so they have very strong researchers in the industry research also, right? But in many other countries, that is not true. So how do you think that this kind of communication gap can be bridged between the professors and the industry researchers, and what is the way forward for that?
I think, Pia, we might want to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cultural thing is really important to try and break out. You know, I think it's important for academics to be a little bit more articulate and patient with those in industry who haven't deep dived, but are obviously keen to understand and help chaperone.
Sorry, Pia, could you close?
So I feel like that is sort of about breaking those perceptions down and challenging as academics to try and take that moment in time and to explain the context of what your research is and how it could be applied, and how that deep learning comes through is important to sort of help people understand. And as I said before, you know, for those in industry, we need to also take the patient time and actually spend the effort to come out and listen, and be available to listen. And question and test understandings. I think we were talking about before about how fascinating it is that there are so many hurdles along the way. So you might get the moment, but there are so many no's and moments where you have to pick yourself back up and do it again. But it is about testing those boundaries and keeping them going to try and get that comms going so that you can really make that magic happen.
Do you think we need to do more on better science communication training for our academics?
I mean, I don't think it wouldn't. I think it would all help. You know, I think we all have to lift our game and learn. We're all smart people. We're all trying to do very similar things, and we all want to make something cool work. So,
I think one of the other things that is really important is that negative feedback is actually the best kind of feedback.
Yeah.
Like that, maybe the idea that you know, the path that you're going down is maybe not the best. Obviously, you want like some other ideas about things that you could improve and some kind of information that would help you improve the research that negative feedback is actually the kind that allows you to make improvements in your direction and change the direction you're going and so on. So I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Thank you. I see a hand.
Hi, so Paddy Nixon here at the University of Canberra. You posed the question about building another Silicon Valley here. I'm sure I've heard that question many times. At the heart of it is taking risks. Do you reckon universities encourage and actually reward risk-taking in their academics?
That's a good question. Notionally, yes. Practically, there is definitely in the internal reward systems like promotions, etc. There's a lot of bean counting that really discourages risk-taking. And in my case, I was lucky that I had when I started this long journey, 10 years to something people were interested in using, I was lucky to have a existing engagement. I was working with our photovoltaics people that generated plenty of papers that kept the bean counters off my back. But it really, it is difficult to really bootstrap something really ambitious inside the university because the returns may take a long time to get there, even by uni standards. And people want to see really publications within a few years, etc. So that is a definite challenge. And once you have an established group, then it becomes easier, right? And there's enough ongoing stuff where the pipeline started longer time ago to keep producing these outputs. But the university system by and large is biased against risk-taking.
I think the other thing you can do is encourage the students to take risks. So if you can build students, if you can build a culture within the students which causes them to want to be entrepreneurs, and I was talking to someone just earlier about the maker spaces here that are here and the practical projects. There's a whole bunch of different things that are going on within the university which are enormously valuable to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit and to give students experience with the sorts of things, and I've talked about this a bunch before, like the soft skills that they need in order to make companies happen, and to see building a company as a viable, a good outcome, as not a giving into commercialism or something like. I think there's an idea about that in Australia, whereas in the US, starting a company, yeah, that's something that's admired, and certainly a cultural difference between Sydney and Silicon Valley. So I think creating that culture of entrepreneurialism within the students and within the research groups to see opportunities and take the research that we have out to the wider world is enormously valuable. And we're again talking about the genesis of companies rather than linkages, but equally linking with existing companies down the line is probably going to be much easier if the founders of those companies started life at the universities and started life as academics. And you know, this is the way we build a little bit of momentum around a connection between the two.
Hi, Rob Pike, retired. I would like to expand a little bit on that because there's a point that is skirting around without quite getting to, comparing Silicon Valley culture to the culture here. In the 70s, I was involved in a project as a graduate student where we essentially tried to launch something, but the university wanted to hold on to a lot of it, and it ended up generating a lot of friction. Actually, eventually split off, and Mathematica happened. But before that, the university was holding on. What happened in the next 20 years in Silicon Valley was Berkeley and Stanford eventually realized that the best way to get things out was to let them go. And they actually started focusing on entrepreneurism as a goal, not the only goal, but a goal of university life, so that when a student has an idea for a project, they can make a startup, and the university is not trying to hold on to the IP, is not trying to hold on to the money. The hope is that statistically, the startup culture will work, and the ones where the students have been encouraged to happen will then bring money back in various ways through endowments and so on. That culture doesn't seem to be in place here, at least not that I've seen it, and I'm wondering if that's something that the university could do to improve this kind of forward projection.
Your observation is totally right, of course. I think over the past 10 years or so, universities have been doing much more. There's a lot of support for entrepreneurialism at UNSW specifically, but also at other universities. We have these sort of startup incubators, etc. It takes a while to build up the culture, but I think that the universities have got the message and they're working actively on it.
And one thing to highlight also, we have a very successful UNSW Founders Program on campus, and also I think there's a lot more activity these days with faculty being encouraged to do spin-off and startups, and we certainly see a lot more activity these days from our faculty of engineering here. Thank you for that question. Is there any other question from the floor? All good? Oh, Aaron.
Unless somebody's putting up their hand behind me, I will ask a question. Industry and academia are often encouraged to come together in bigger groups, in consortia, in associations, in centers of excellence, ARC ITRPs, ARC ITRHs, acronym, okay? Why, for each of you, from either the academic side or the industry side, why would you encourage people in industry and academia to come together in a consortium? Is it a good thing? And if so, why?
I think it's absolutely a good thing. I think it's very, very well established that if you have a diversity of opinions in a conversation or in a decision-making process, that decision comes out better. And you can trace this in all sorts of different places, but if you have a diversity of opinions, it's a good thing. Academics have a different, or academic institutions have a very different focus to, the focus of being in business is to stay in business and is commercially focused, and therefore most decisions are made around what is going to be the best commercial outcome. Academics tend to have a whole lot of non-commercial goals in mind, and I think that that's enormously valuable in all of those sort of things, standard setting, whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of opportunity for differences of opinion within those organizations. And while you don't want to design by committee, you certainly want to have the opinions from a wide variety of sources.
I haven't actually, I mean, I've watched consortiums build, and I guess I want to sort of express the negative side of a consortium, and there's so many. I think in industry we're inundated with so many ideas and products, and I think we were having this conversation before at lunch. Why don't we do something? Well, we're actually very insular and trying to work out how to just get our own little consortium within the own organisation working. So then extending out to someone else's organisation or an academic, we would go, oh, take a bit of a breath. Can I just get in-house sorted first before I go? And yes, I know all the good ideas, but I think there's a very conscious bias not to lean into those moments, which is probably why you don't have so many of them building. And you choose them very carefully, I guess. So that you know that the relationships and the cultural barriers can be overcome somewhat, or the vision's strong enough to pull you forward. So for me, it's about finding those right tension points. And as I said before, and I've said a number of ways, I don't know how to describe how to find the right tension. It's very personal for the organisation as well as the individuals, and the tenure and all that sort of side of things all comes into play. So if we can solve that, that'd be great. But I think we'd all be millionaires by now. So.
Yes, so my answer to that question would be a clear yes, but. Because there's a lot of money thrown around by governments, typically though a bit sprinkling rather than strategic investment, but in many cases it ends up a lot of people deciding to go after some pot, and then they divvy it up and everyone does their own thing, and there's no real synergies and coherence, etc. And these are always failures. And I've seen in a very comparable context both the good side and the bad side. For example, in the DARPA HACMS program, there was the air team that was totally integrated, had a common mission, they achieved massively, and there was the ground team that everyone was doing their own thing and nothing came out of it. And again, there's no simple recipe. Obviously, getting people together is a starting point, and without that, you're not getting anywhere, but it's not sufficient, right? There has to be a really strong sense of a common mission and an approach to achieve together, and an understanding how the different skills and experience can support each other to achieve a common goal that's beyond the sum of the individuals.
And just to add to that, it's about holding each other accountable to making sure that you each achieve your respective goals. And that's hard to have. So I think you have to be, brave enough to be able to go, no, I don't get that. That's not going to be in alignment. And that systemic thing that you've just put in has just ruined the vibe for me to move forward. So what can we do to correct that moment? So I think, we have to keep having those debates so that we can uncover how to unlock and move forward.
That's great. I think one thing I also take away from this conversation today is, that the different drivers between industry and academia. And one thing, though, that Gernot actually mentioned in the beginning, that he was very satisfied with that project because he can see it's deployed in the world today. So I think I'm sure this is the same thing that industry will, my fellow panelists here from industry will also say. There will be one thing that will be satisfied as well. They can see their products out in the real world used by many people. I think that is actually, can we agree that is one thing that, you know, we'll be happily moving on if that is something that we could achieve. It will make the world a better place, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and we can do this from Australia. Like this isn't, the world is a small place, particularly at the moment, where there is no sort of physical barriers. I mean, there's a time zone slight issue that we have to deal with and we have to accept here in Australia, and that is, you know, a challenge for us. But aside from the time zone, the distance is not an issue. We can compete on an even playing field. There's no reason that we can't compete. We have challenges, we have expertise that we need to build up. We have, you know, things like challenges like this, the one that we're talking about, but there is no reason that Australia can't compete on a world stage. And, you know, it's been demonstrated by Gernot. We've done it at Matemaco now, and others. But, you know, we can build technology here, we can ship it to the world, and we really can change the world from here in Sydney.
There's a very good way of actually closing this panel. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists.